Hi, all. I'm Trisha Peach, host of the Peach Buzz, and I'm very excited you came back to see us today. Hello to all of the new followers from the Bible Creative Conference. It was my pleasure to speak there. I had a wonderful time. Well, I have known today's guest for, I can't believe it, over 8 years now, was when I first met Pastor Joe Bridger when we were both starting our master's program at Bethel. It does not feel like that long to me.
No.
But Pastor Joe Bridger, he has done amazing things with church renovations, church growth. Need to understand that right now, I think the statistic is 92% of all American churches are in decline. So if you are growing at all, that is in the minority, and especially if you're growing with salvations, that's really great. And right now, Pastor Joe Bridger, when did you come on as pastor in Abbotsford?
We came here, it's been about 2 years and 3 months, 4 months now,
Wow.
since we've come. Yeah, it's been a
Wow.
while. So we're in a rural area. We went from 330,000 people in the greater
Oh,
Lansing area to a 4,000 person town because Jesus loves rural and he loves people in every demographic, in every circumstance, in every situation. And the Lord said, sell
amen.
your house and move. And I said no. And then eventually the Lord wins because he always wins those conversations.
Yes,
So
he does. I love that because I was in Dayton, big city, and here I am now in New London, which is an outskirt of Appleton, Oshkosh. It's a small town, 9,000. I love it here. And what I loved was when somebody I knew, Pastor Joe Bridger, moved to the Wisconsin district. I was like, oh, this poor guy, but at least he knew cold from Michigan. And yes, Jesus loves the rural areas, and I love how it's some of these rural area churches that are growing. I don't think it's budget that is mainly behind growth. I think it's creativity, courage, willing to step out and change some things, um, led by the Spirit of God. Very neat stuff. So I met Pastor Joe Bridger. He is our district uses him for consulting on a lot of things, church growth, church renovation, that kind of thing. Well, I wanted to pick his brain a bit on a topic that everybody watching this should be thinking about. I don't care if you're the lead pastor, the children's pastor, the associate pastor, because I promise you the business administrator is going to think about this. If you have one, what happens if a child or an adult gets injured at one of your church services or one of your activities? There's a
hmm
reason why I kind of worry more about a child getting injured than an adult. That's mainly because my background as a children's pastor. Secondly, kids tend to run around more. We have games going on, at least we always did with Awana. We had a lot of games. So, and preschoolers, they get hurt. They get hurt. They fall, they trip, somebody gets hurt. In the nursery, somebody bites somebody. We had this happen many times. I don't think it's a case of if, I think it's more of when. So there's a lot of churches I run into that have no plan or procedure for any of this. Okay.
Right.
The other reason I think that we think about kids more is okay, if a couple's walking into church and the guy slips on the ice and falls, yes, that might be that could be very complicated. If a child gets hurt, parents seem to get a little protective on that one. I know I have two children, and I dealt with parents through the years that child got hurt, and they rightfully want some answers from you. How did that happen, and why? And secondary to all of that, because number one, we want the kids to be safe. We want them to hear about Jesus and love Jesus. But secondary, churches have to think about lawsuits. They do happen.
Yep.
And from my experience, what they told us, this was a church of 3,000, was that we had to be able to show that we did, quote, due diligence, that we tried something, that we had some steps in place. And if we knew about a problem or we had taken no steps, we were up the creek without a paddle.
hmm
So I wondered, in your experience, what could be some of the problems if a church just doesn't do, they don't talk about this, they don't think about this. I think the going thing is, well, just pray about it and God will take care of you. I kind of think of this like, throw yourself off a cliff and the angels will catch you before you hit the ground.
Right.
Especially if you have a lot of children in your program.
Right.
But I mean, we have some older people in our church, and any of them falling on the ice would be catastrophic. I know that. So what could be some of the dangers of not thinking about somebody getting hurt on your church property?
Boy, oh boy, there's a lot. And it's not just on your church property. I was just able to be the coordinator of a camp this last summer for about 125 kids, and I think we had about 55 adults there. And it's great to sit in that seat instead of being the speaker at the camp. You get to be the guy who fixes all the problems, keeps all the plates spinning, but the liability and the reality, we had the very first day we had a kid break a window and he shattered a window. And so immediately, you're thinking about liability and what are we going to do about this and all this. But I've been blessed to be able to be at camps with in Washington State, in Idaho, in Alaska,
Wow.
in Oregon,
Oh my
in
goodness.
Oklahoma, and in Texas, because I traveled with a ministry team in the beginning of my ministry in Northwest University in Kirkland, Washington, called ACTS, Announcing Christ Through Skits. And we got
Wow.
to travel to these different camps and things like this, and everybody had a little different policies and things like that. But, we don't think about the events and the things that happen if it happens inside your building, if it happens outside your building. Do you rent a facility? If you rent a facility, and somebody gets hurt in that facility, a kid gets hurt in that facility, what happens there? That's our scenario. We have a building, and our building does not have the capacity to be able to have an elementary space, so we rent from across the street. And so what happens when somebody gets hurt over there? And, they play games, have activities, and this sort of thing. What happens? And do you have a plan? And I think that that's part of the question. The very first thing you got to ask is there a plan? And is your senior pastor, I know you've talked a lot about this, but is your senior pastor involved in the plan? Does he realize, does he know, if there is a plan, what's going to happen, how it's going to work? And oftentimes the senior pastor will look at you and go, well, that's why we hired you. And you know what? They don't really cover those things in some of our, like, if maybe you were educated, you just kind of learned from the School of Hard Knocks how to be involved in children's ministry. You learn through experience. They didn't cover that in that. They didn't cover it necessarily in maybe a correspondence sort of situation where you got a certificate. They didn't cover it maybe fully. And even in seminary, I remember when we were getting our master's degree in children's and family ministry,
Yep.
I don't think we spent a great deal on liability and what could happen. And because anything could happen, right?
Right.
I mean, it could be as simple as a situation. I mean, and I've got so many stories, but a situation where, a volunteer is allowed to come into the preschool who maybe, and these are all real things I've had to deal with. Volunteer comes in the preschool and they're not supposed to be there. They're not checked in. They're not background checked. They're not anything. They're just the friend of a teenager who spent the night at the volunteer's house. And the preschool director is tired. She's exhausted because she's going through some personal problems at home. And she just kind of lets the kid in, lets the teenager in that isn't background checked, that isn't familiar with the culture of the church, that doesn't know anything about the church. And now she's serving and she's helping and she's in the preschool. What could go wrong? And, a little boy gets spun around on a playground swing on the outside of the church during playtime, so much so that he ends up getting sick in the car on the way home. And we return the child, sadly, back to the parents worse than we received them.
Right.
And then what happened in that scenario? Preschool director immediately told me, she said, I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. This volunteer didn't understand our culture. They didn't know how to work with kids. I just let them in. I'm so sorry. And I'm so glad she came up and talked to me, because within 2 minutes, I got a phone call from the dad. The dad was unsaved. He didn't know Jesus, and he was angry. And rightfully so. And rightfully so.
Yeah.
And I talked with him. Fortunately, I just literally like 2 minutes earlier had this conversation with the preschool director. I said, I am so sorry. I apologize. We were about the same age. At the time, we had kids right around the same age. And you know what? He worked for an insurance company and a retirement insurance company. And so he knew things and everything. But I apologized to him. I promised him it would never happen again. I followed up with him. Our preschool director followed up with him. And you know what? He put his kid back in our children's ministry. He eventually gave his life to Jesus. And then
Yay.
later on, he actually offered me a job working for him.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I said, why? And he goes, you know, Joe, the thing about it is I immediately knew I could trust you. I immediately knew you were going to tell me the truth. And I immediately knew I could trust you with my kid. So if I could trust you with my kid, I could probably trust you with my business. I didn't take the job, but it was nice to be offered.
That's pretty neat that I noticed you responded to that with, you were honest.
Yep.
You didn't get all defensive
No,
or try to get combative with the parent. You
no,
were de-escalating the situation.
right.
Um, I I cringe sometimes when leaders will, and I also love that your leader talked to you. One my video from a couple weeks ago, I was talking about not giving your senior pastor surprises,
Right.
and that
Yeah.
in most of these situations, they're going to go to the senior leader, and it's
Right.
not right to make that a surprise. Give them a heads up, let them know what they're about to have to deal with. And in this case, that just sounds fantastic to me. Not getting combative, not getting, let's
No,
escalate this, let's make this worse.
don't get
Um,
defensive.
and acknowledging, hey, this is
Yep.
what, and treating them like a human being and a parent. Because
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely.
And I think a lot of times in scenarios like that, you have to ask yourself, well, if this were my kid, what would I do? How would I feel? And there's those aspects to it, but then you get into the liability of it. And this is, so I've had kids throw up, I've had kids get cut, I've had kids get hurt, I've had kids lose their glasses, my own son.
Oh no.
I've had kids, I mean, all sorts of scenarios, situations. We've had kids fall out of bunk beds at camp. We've had kids, their medication needs to be managed. We've had parents that are happy, sad, every spectrum under the sun.
Yep.
But the thing about it that a lot of children's pastors don't do, and a lot of people who work with kids don't do, is they don't have a working relationship either with their senior pastor, but also with their insurance company. And I'm going to give you a good understanding of this now because, like, for instance, and these are all scenarios I've literally had to deal with. We had a registered sex offender, an RSO, wanted to attend our church. And, back then everybody's trying to figure out, okay, so do we let them attend? Do we not let them attend? What's the circumstances? What's the situation? And we lived in Seattle area, and there were a lot of scenarios and situations like this where people had made mistakes in their life and God redeems. What do we do?
Right.
And some churches were like, oh, yeah, we need to let him in. And then they said to me, well, let's write a policy. Let's create a policy. And I created a policy. I did some research, figured it out. And then I got this idea. I said, you know what we should probably do is we should probably call our insurance agent and just see, what they say. Most children's leaders don't think about that when they write policies. So I called and I said, hey, we did this, and I sent it to him, and I said, and he goes, great, awesome. But he said it too quickly. He said, great, awesome, too quickly. He didn't have any follow-up questions. And I said, hey, wait a second. Why didn't you, don't you have any questions? And he was like, no. Why not? Because it's not covered. Just because you wrote a policy about a situation in church doesn't mean your insurance agent and your insurance organization, whether it's Brotherhood Mutual, Church Mutual, is going to cover it. So that scenario was never going to be covered. And so I took that back to my board and I said, yes, I did write this policy and we can implement this policy, but you need to understand that if something happens, the possibility of this word that scares a lot of senior pastors, liquidation. This word is possible because if it's not covered under your $1 million insurance policy and somebody gets hurt, somebody gets taken advantage of, somebody gets injured, and it's not covered, whether it's because of something that somebody does to somebody else or an injury, it could, if the lawsuit, if it goes forward, if something bad happens and somebody decides to sue the church, you're looking at maybe $1 million. If it's not covered by your insurance company, your policy that you created, you can go into court and say, look, we did a good faith effort, and they might say, okay, you tried, but your insurance company isn't going to be on the hook for that.
No.
That's why I think it's important for when you write policies in children's ministries to check with your insurance companies and say, hey, because here's the thing, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Here's the thing. When it comes to injuries or incident reports that you should have
Yes.
incident reports. You should write up injuries. There should be a paper trail happening.
Yes.
If these things don't happen, you're in trouble. But there should be a
Oof.
paper trail every time somebody throws up, every time somebody bleeds, every time somebody has to, if you have to pull out a first aid kit, that should be documented in some way. You should have that. And your insurance companies oftentimes will even provide you the ability to document. They'll even tell you how they want it done so that you can follow their rules, because otherwise it's not covered. And that's something that you wouldn't know
I did not
because
know this. I never knew to go talk to our insurance agent. I know that my lead pastor right now does do that, but I had never considered that. Um, and what you're talking about, I hear so many kids pastors and lead pastors say, well, God would not let that happen to us. Well, we're supposed to be doing due diligence and having wisdom, and the enemy's still walking about like a roaring lion, seeking who
yeah,
we may devour. And I'm thinking, I won't mention what district. I know, I think I mentioned this to you when we were in our masters, but this certain district in my denomination, our denomination, that they had a pastor that committed a moral failure, and they reinstated him after he went through the process. They had a policy. He
right.
went through the process of the policy,
Policy.
and they reinstated him, and he did another moral failure with a secretary, and this time she was a grown adult, but she and
Right.
her family still sued the, not just the church, but the denomination and the general council. And what happened was
Wow.
the district was found at fault because they said, you knew he did this before. And they said, yes, but we had a policy, we had a procedure. And they said, yeah, that doesn't matter. He still did it again.
Yeah.
And because he's in a position of power and she's not, then you're still liable. They had to liquidate the camp. They lost the Bible camp. They had to liquidate that church. The
Right.
district lost literally millions.
Right.
It didn't go anywhere with the general council, though, because when they went after the general council was able to say that they did not know, well, the circumstances with this pastor, and they could prove that they weren't the ones that reinstated him there.
Sure.
But what you just said resonates there with what I've seen happen.
Right.
So I heard you say some things that each church should do. Okay, talk to their insurance company. Right now, like Brotherhood Mutual and Church Mutual kind of have a monopoly, so most churches go with those. Talk to your insurance agent.
And
Two,
when it comes to talking to your insurance agent, once a year, usually your insurance agent will stop by your church. Be in that meeting with your pastor.
oh,
Just because now what we've done is in the last little bit, we've sufficiently scared people. Like right now,
yeah.
there's a bunch of children's pastors going, "Oh my gosh!" And it's like, you know what? It's going to be okay.
Yes.
Let's breathe. And here's a simple step. When you find, just ask your pastor, ask your administrative assistant, "Hey, you know what? When's the insurance agent going to come by? I'd love to sit in that meeting."
Yes.
You know, and it's just really nonchalant. It's conversational. I just love to learn and grow. And you know, we got to these policies. I just want to make sure the insurance agent's okay with it. I want to make sure, and they'll start giving you information, but you got to be in the meeting.
Well,
So,
because a lot of lawsuits, if they're going to happen, I think it's going to be in the kids area,
right.
unfortunately.
Yeah, that's one thing, is make sure that you're in that meeting, you know.
I love that. So make sure you're in that meeting. I heard you talk about making sure you had incident reports. Now, the
Yes.
reason that connected with me is to earn my way through my undergrad. I was a security officer at Mall of America. I worked my way up kind of through the ranks, and I just thought I was earning money to go to college, but God was training me there for ministry. That was my training for ministry, because I had a lot of the administrative side. One of the things we learned, and they ground this into us, was if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. Don't
Yes.
care what you're going to say at the moment of now. If you didn't put it in writing, it didn't happen and it doesn't count. So we had that ground into us that, like you said, they throw up, or there's somebody that bled. We had an argument with pushing and shoving. You put that in writing Cover your butt. We called it
And
something
you
else,
have
but
to
cover your butt.
and you have to train your what I did was I had, those folders that you have that you can go ahead, file folders, plastic holders. I had those up on the door, like
Mhm.
right next to where the lights were. I mounted them on the door, and I had red, yellow, and green, and they were different things for different policies. And so the incident reports were there, and I trained all my volunteers before that kid leaves that room. If the kid had a seizure, if the kid threw up, if there was a serious cut where you had to go ahead and you had to get the first aid kit, you have a conversation with the parent at the door, but you
Yes.
make sure that that information is documented, and that information ends up in the children's pastor's hand, because you can't
Yes.
be everywhere all at once.
Right.
And you make sure that the children's pastor knows, just like my preschool director did. She made
Yes.
sure to talk to me immediately, and then when the angry parent came after the church, I was able to deal with it, not my preschool director. But she'd filled out an incident report. She'd done everything right because she was amazing. She was just having a really rough time in her life in that moment. She was, and we gave her grace. And you know what? She was one of the most amazing preschool directors I've ever served with.
Absolutely.
But she made a mistake in that moment. She owned up to it, and we got it figured out. But all my volunteers knew, okay, where's the incident? You don't want to be like, oh, where was my paperwork? Where do we got it stuffed underneath the drawer somewhere? We're like that with first aid kits, right?
Yes.
Don't be
Yes.
that way with first aid kits, and don't be that way with incident reports. Know where they are. Make sure your volunteers know where they are, and make sure it gets filled out
Yes.
before they leave that building on Sunday or whatever, wherever they're leaving. Okay, it
Yeah.
needs to get to the camp office, or it needs to get to the administrator, or it needs to get before they leave the building. Because you don't call them later and be like, "Oh yeah, I think it's over there," and it's like a Tuesday, and you never found out as the children's pastor that it happened.
Oh, exactly. I think it's a great idea to partner with your local public school for a lot of reasons. I love that they had right on the wall, here's what you do, color coded if you have an emergency, if you have an injury, a tornado, a fire. And I mean, let's be honest, in the middle of a huge incident, nobody's going to sit there and thumb through something this big. And I know,
No.
can anybody relate out there? Our church had this gigantic one that was like this thick, and nobody knew where it was. I finally found it. It was from 1984. And who's going to thumb through all of that in an emergency? So I learned a lot from substitute teaching. I had a one that I put on the wall that had, here's what you do in each one of these, one page. And then we had it's right by the phone, because if you're in an emergency situation, you're not going to remember, even if you've done a training 2 years ago. And I had a radio there that you could pick up the radio and call me, and I could come.
Very important. Yeah, the
Yes,
communication aspect in real time. Yeah.
absolutely. I learned
We
in.
had
Go ahead. Go
we
ahead.
had all those policies, like all of our volunteers knew where the policies were.
Yeah.
They were up on a wall, and they
Perfect.
had all of our incident reports, everything that we had. They didn't have to go looking around, okay, open up a drawer, where's the incident report? What am I gonna do? And then they're calling you on the walkie-talkie, hey, where are the incident reports? I don't know where they are. They were right by there.
Yes.
We met the parent at the door, we told them what
Yes.
happened, we had conversations, this is what happened. All that communication took place. Then the incident report was written, and I trained my volunteers to do this. Written, taken care of. It was given to me because I can't be everywhere at once.
Right.
And it was actually, so by Sunday afternoon, I knew what had happened in writing. It was taken care of, and then that would be processed throughout the course of the week. But I wasn't finding out on Wednesday that a kid almost got his finger cut off during something that was going on.
Oh.
I knew before the end of Sunday afternoon that something had happened. And because I had trained my volunteers that way, and I had made all my paperwork accessible.
Oh my goodness. That just reminds me of two things that I learned working security. That was how I, earned my way through my undergrad. People think it's just money so you can go to college, but I think God uses everything, even the secular.
Yeah.
I think I became so much better at kids ministry and ministry in general because of substitute teaching, honestly. But I've worked in a lot of fields in high school. I was in bank teller and then a waitress. So you learn, God takes you on different paths, but they drilled into us two really important things. Number one, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen.
Right. Absolutely.
So as far as the court's concerned, whatever you have to say after the fact means nothing. What you wrote down is what's going to count. Okay. So you have to write it down, hence the incident reports. And two, in an emergency, in a crisis, you will do what you trained to do. So if you
Yes.
have no plan, you will do nothing. And that's what
And
happens to a lot of people. They don't know what to do. Oh, this child just bit another child, and they'll just stand there because
yeah,
they don't know what to do. So I love what you had there. Okay, we're giving your brain some tools here. Okay, I look up here.
yeah,
I need to do an incident report. I need to tell the children's pastor. I need to I'm not going to clean up the blood. I'm going to ask for help from the children's pastor.
yeah.
There has
There's
to be a
also
plan.
there's a plan, because really what you're in is in crisis. You are in mini crisis intervention. It is a crisis. It
Mm,
may not be a crisis to you that this kid cut his finger and he's bleeding all over the place, but it's a crisis to him or her. They think they're gonna die and they're starting to
yes.
cry because they're 4, and it might be a crisis to the parent. And so you need to process.
Mm,
When a parent might be like, oh, well, whatever. Or a parent will be like, oh my gosh, my child was cut in our ministry. I'm never going back to that church again.
mm.
Ah. And to
Oh,
them, it's a crisis. So you have
yes.
to treat it that way. But you also
Yes.
have to have what I call flexure. You
Mm,
have to have policies that are flexible, because every incident is a little different. And,
yes.
and you don't want to be sufficiently paralyzed with fear. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? No,
Yeah.
you break it down and you say, well, I don't have any policies. What am I going to do? Okay, take Monday and say, okay, Monday I'm going to work on policy. Take Tuesday, I'm going to work on policy. One day a week, then you've gotten 4 days where you've worked on it. And then at the end of the month, you're going to have something. It might be
Yes.
small, it might be a beginning, but it's something. And you have to do this as well. I think this is one of the most important things: follow up and follow through.
Ooh.
You have to follow up and follow through. You have to go
Yes.
ahead and care. You do.
Yes.
Great, you filled out the policy paperwork. Great. But do you call the parent and you say, hey, you know what? I just want to know how John is doing. How's he doing? I heard that he had a tummy ache. I heard he had a cut. I heard this thing happened. I heard you guys had to go to the hospital afterward. What's going on? How's that happening? And do the pastoral care.
Yes.
Follow up and follow through. Love this family effectively. And 99% of the time, I found that if you do the follow up and follow through, they know you care. The
Yes.
policy stuff, great. Okay, fine. That makes, but do they know that you love their kid?
Yes. Their child has to matter more than protecting ourselves and getting all defensive.
Right,
Uh,
right.
the child matters more. What would you say to a kids pastor or even a lead pastor that is watching this going, I just feel so overwhelmed. I feel like I don't know what to do. There's just so many things, so many
Yeah.
liabilities. I don't even know where to start. I love your
So
idea
yeah,
of doing one thing that, take a Monday and do this. And after a month, you have something to work with. That's just starting somewhere.
yeah. Well, you communicate, like we talked about, you communicate with the insurance agent. You make sure
Mhm.
that, because your insurance agents will always, I guarantee you, your insurance agents have DVDs and training videos on what they think is covered in their policies and how to go ahead and fill out incident reports. So you
Mhm.
start with your insurance, you start talking to them because they probably have a template. Go to your denomination. Your denomination, if you
Mhm.
have a denomination, just go to them and say, hey, I'm just curious, do you guys have any templates on how to handle incidences and how to handle
Yes.
injuries for children's and families and things like that in the church? We miss the forest for the trees. We're like, where do I even start? Just call them. If
Don't
you're
reinvent the
non-denominational,
wheel.
if you're non-denominational and you're at a 200 or 300 person church, call another 200 or 300 person church.
I
The
love
great thing
that.
about especially Christian education and children's pastors, we share everything. Nobody cares who gets the credit. We
No,
don't care. So here, take
we
my
all
policy
share.
manual.
I
And
agree.
I've written policy manuals. I've created policy manuals. I mean, I help churches across the country to do this stuff,
Yes.
and they'll send me their policy manuals and they'll be like, well, what do you think about this? And I'm like, okay, well, I would edit this, I'd change that. Because I'm kind of weird. I'm a little bit of a robot and I kind of think like a robot sometimes. And it's our job to kind of, think about those things.
But you
Think
know
about it
how
from the
things are in a lot
50,000
of
different views.
states too. Like you've done this in so many states. Yeah. So
Yeah.
know,
Five states. So
do
yeah.
you mind if some of our viewers contact you with questions? I know you get bombarded all the time. Our district like hammers him with consulting, but can we
Well,
give
they
them?
do ask for help, and that's fine. But you know what? I'm more than happy if you want to share my contact information with people. I've helped a lot of people. I've helped them at Children's Pastors Conference. We've coached people. I've done stuff at the Christian uh, Education Conference out in Redmond, Washington. Just Yeah, if I can help anybody, that's what I'm here to do. So
I want to thank you for coming on today, because this has just been gold for me, and I hope for quite a few of you. Please comment down below what you know about, what is your best tips for getting these policies together, and crisis management, which he's really good at. You should comment below if you want to see him do a second one on crisis management. We plan to have him back shortly to do one on camp and emotional crisis that happens at camp, because he's an expert on that as well, which I'm excited about. So your takeaways from today: just start. Don't get overwhelmed. The ministry's got to go on. Talk to your insurance agent. Be in that meeting. Partner with your local public school. Just see what you can learn from them. They've got a lot that you could learn from. Contact your denomination or a different denomination. Look at what churches are doing that are the same size as you, because it's not always about, some huge church may not translate to what you're doing, right? And then just get started. Do a little bit. Maybe just work on a incident report first, or talk to your insurance agent first. But do get started. And I just want to say a huge thank you for all you do for Jesus and his kids. And I hope you'll come back and see us again soon, that you'll like and subscribe, and come back when we bring Pastor Joe back to talk about camp and emotional crises. All right. We love you guys. Thank you for all you do for Jesus and his kids. We'll see you next week on the Peach Buzz.